Thank you.
All right, well, if you've played games like Quake, you know how hard this can be on your fingers and on your brain. In fact, it ought to be an Olympic sport, I would think, because the guys who are good at these games are really kind of athletes in a way. One of the best of them is the gamer named Thresh. His real name is Dennis Fong, and this is Thresh over here. How you doing, Dennis?
How you doing, Stewart?
And what I was talking about Quake, and people don't know, a couple of years ago, you were considered like the best Quake player in the world, right?
That's right. Actually, it all culminated into this big Quake tournament featuring a red Ferrari.
Right, which you won.
Which I ended up winning.
You won,
right.
And you were too young to even drive it at the time, right?
Not quite, I couldn't quite.
It was a stick.
It was a stick, and I didn't actually know how to drive stick at the time.
So you know this stuff. Now, there's a new version of Quake out now, Quake 3 or Quake Arena. First of all, what's new and better about this than the original Quake that you played?
Well, Quake 3, the new one, is actually a lot more arcadey.
Okay.
It's software. The developers of Quake have simplified it to where it's much easier to get online to play against people. It's much easier to find opponents. It is also much easier to kill your opponent, because what they found were the really good players were just completely dominating.
Blowing everybody away.
Right, and so the newer players found it very difficult to get into the game and get into the flow. So this new Quake 3 is much easier to play.
Primarily online? Multiplayer?
It is primarily online.
Okay.
It's actually made for multiplayer specifically.
Got it, it's a multiplayer.
They do have a single player component, but it's not, as opposed to the previous versions of Quake, the earlier versions, there was a storyline and there was a kind of a story that you played through. In this version, you just play against bots.
Okay, since you were the master of the original Quake, I mean, do you like this one more or less? Is it more of a challenge, less of a challenge?
Well, Quake has always been a classic. It still is a classic, and it's it's kind of back at my roots. But I have to admit that Quake 3 is incredibly fun to play.
All right, we have it up here, so give us an idea what Quake 3 looks like.
Well, essentially, Quake 3 it's almost, I guess the easiest way to explain it would be like paintballing on the computer.
Okay.
Essentially you run into the game, and we have 3 bots playing against me right now.
Okay.
And essentially you pick up weapons and armor, and you go after each other. And whoever ends up, as you kill an opponent, you get points.
Right.
And at the end of a certain time limit, whoever has the most points wins.
Now, keep playing here, Dennis, but I want to ask you, for people who are maybe not into this as much as you guys are, you've seen a lot of these games and they sort of all look alike. There's a gun at the front there, and there's a bunch of guys, and you blast away. And some people have trouble understanding what the kick of this is. Explain what the thrill is of playing this game.
Well, I mean, it's, because it's all real time. I mean, it's essentially like Cowboys and Indians all over again.
You can't stop and think.
Right, exactly. So everything happens in real time. When your opponent moves left, he moves left.
So it is this real like adrenaline rush. I mean, you got to be there or be dead.
Oh yeah, and actually, if you're playing alone at night in the dark room, sometimes if your opponent pops around a corner, you can jump out of your chair physically. It's pretty neat.
Right. But a little bit easier for the novice to maybe get into playing it.
Quake 3 is definitely much easier to get into.
All right, now I want to talk to you about another game. Now, I guess it was 2 years ago, we showed the original Half-Life when it first came out. And that was a great game, of course. And now there's a newer version of Half-Life, again, a multiplayer internet version of it. Tell us about that.
Well, Counter-Strike is essentially, it was actually created by 2 guys out of a garage.
Huh.
And one of the really neat things about these games is that it's modifiable. And so what they did was they took the original Half-Life engine and modified it and started building on it. And actually, they didn't do any marketing for it. They started off as a very small community. And as more and more people started playing this game, it just started picking up steam.
So really kind of grassroots. So, I mean, is it really related to Half-Life or not?
Well, the neat thing about Counter-Strike, as opposed to a game like Quake 3, is that it's based entirely on realism. Meaning, in Quake 3, there are things that you can do. You're playing predominantly with a rocket launcher or a lightning gun, and you can actually rocket jump and jump like 500 feet in the air.
But Half-Life is like life.
Exactly. Yeah. So in Counter-Strike, it's actually it's kind of like the Navy SEALs or SWAT team versus terrorists.
Right. Give us a quick look at it now.
Right. This is Counter-Strike, and once again, this is a modification to Half-Life, the original game.
Okay.
And so the really neat thing about this modification is that you can download it for free over the internet.
Okay.
If you
have the original Half-Life.
Exactly.
Right, that's cool.
So
yeah, this isn't meant to be internet multiplayer. We're not really online right now because we didn't have time to do it. But you're just going to show us the terrain here. I guess.
Exactly. Well, as I said before, Counter-Strike is based on real life, and this particular level that we're playing is based on Las Vegas.
Okay.
And so as you can see, the MGM Grand type stuff.
Right.
And essentially,
so what's the realism in here? I mean, what do you have to do?
Well, in Counter-Strike, the differences are that first of all, for example, the weapons. If you hold down the weapons and fire, they're not always going to hit the same place. Just like in real life, there's recoil.
Ah, it moves around. Okay.
Exactly. Number 2, if you hit certain parts of the body, it does more damage. So if you hit the head, he's going to die instantly.
Got it.
So there's a lot of those real-life elements. You know, here you see a vending machine that you can't really buy anything, but
all right, so sort of make-believe game, but very realistic make-believe game.
Exactly.
All right, Dennis, thanks a lot.